Okay. Right, let's do G2 actually, because on past episodes, I actually somewhat skipped G2 because I thought it was a bit boring. Like, I will say the same script seems to play out. Like, the funny thing is, even though in week one they made it spicy by losing those games, they still won every fucking game after that. Like, this team's just too good for the region, mate. Like, I actually think the funny thing about G2 is if you look split to split, it's not even like it's always the same players. Like, basically, Caps always plays well, but they sort of cycle the others. Broken Blade has a split, then Hadsama has a split. It doesn't matter. It seems like who plays well. So, what is the current being as? We're obviously days away from them playing at the Esports World Cup. We'll talk about that later on in the episode. Right? What current level of form do you have G2 in right now?
Think they're pretty high in form. I think Caps is in great form. He's really playing very well mechanically and individually. And this is something when Caps was playing really well, this is when G2 is at the earliest, right? This is something that Caps has always been the X factor for whenever G2 is showing up at these events. And a Caps on form is, I think, is something that teams would really struggle to have. Even against things like the game against Team Heretics, he was just individually just putting up such a difference making performance against Sviru in the mid lane and against Humanoid as well. I think it's just outclassing all the other mid laners at this point of time. And between that, between what they have in terms of the macro, between their, I would say, I wouldn't say for sure that they have their, this is going to be the G2 that we're seeing for the rest of the year because there's only effectively halfway through the season.
Sure.
But it's definitely they've shown that they have the ability to take the fight, the teams. I think MSI was definitely going to be a very interesting inflection point for them, right? Because I don't think that there was a G2 that was underperforming. I think that was a G2 that was close to firing on all
Yes.
cylinders. And then that was a team that was still unable to replicate what they had in 2019.
Yes.
Because unlike 2019, where they were very clearly ahead of understanding of the Korean teams as to how to play the modern game. The same cannot be said. And in fact, as T1, who was ahead in terms of their understanding of the
Yes.
protocols as how to play that. Thankfully, though, I think that BDS can actually provide them a challenge in the macro sense. And it's one of those things where if I feel that they can look at that, they can get the correct practice against BDS, there's some hope for them moving forward. So I'm really looking forward to the G2 BDS game when it happens in playoffs.
I'm with you. I actually think in both those series at MSI, actually individually, the G2 players were outplaying the T1 players. The problem is, as you say, there's a reason they couldn't close the game out. You know what I mean? Like T1 actually just had to hang around and then they could just get the wins at the end, especially that the second series where it was like the 3-0, even though obviously it was very close, to be fair. So, what about this then? I would ask you this. One thing I think is interesting about Caps is I actually do feel like because people who are Caps fans are going to say he's the best every year, I feel like he can actually undersell this year. I think this year is like a contender for his best year ever, mate. Because the other thing about Caps is I always used to think it was really fascinating narratively, almost in an anime storyline style, that when you used to have the old classic of Caps and Perks, and they were both the very best Europe ever produced, you had two very different styles of players. Like on the one hand with Perks, he never was a lane god. It's more like he was just pretty good at most points of the game, and then he would just do like the really smart, captain's move or macro move at the end of the game that like do some hero flank that would win the game for you. And with him, it was more like you felt like he was the ultimate closer, he was the clutch player, as it were. That's why he had that amazing stat of like winning a million of those game fours, If you just got him to that like moment when everyone else would be nervous, he'd make the decisive play. The difference was, I always thought the reason people had that craps narrative for Caps is because Caps' main strength was skill. It was like ability to make crazy plays and beat people with his hands. But I always thought back then he was a lot more hit and miss, and a lot of it was like you didn't always know, is this the game going to be where he makes a big mistake late in the game and throws him it, or is he going to win the whole team fight when you have a team fight? I think the Caps of today has somehow maintained all his strengths. He has way less downside, and actually he's taken on a little bit of that Perks quality for me now, mate. I feel like now he's become a much better, like, closer player as well. Like, this is a guy where if you give this guy a lead, I trust him to close the game and carry the rest of it, I feel like he's gotten really sort of like a killer instinct. What do you think?
It's not just a killer instinct; it's his ability to really play on the edge. And one of the things, even back in the day when I was helping out with Splice, is that this was something that Caps was able to do very well. He has a very impeccable sense of timing to buffer his movement abilities to bait out spells from the opponents, right? Things like channeling the Azir Shuffle, not the ulti combo, right? But even the sliding moves and things like
Right.
that, while buffering that through crowd control, so that you're effectively moving while the stun time is ticking down on you. We see him do that. We see him do that quite a fair bit, and it's because he's playing on the edge. Where I think you have this disaster moments where I think they threw a game against T1 with him getting caught on the mid lane on
Yes.
Tristana, right? And but we see him be willing to do these sort of things, and sometimes it doesn't work out. Sometimes it ends up like the game against T1, but increasingly so, this has been very successful, right? We see him bait out the Leona engage, which I think single-handedly won them the game against Fnatic, where he baited June to go in onto him. He buffed the Corki Valkyrie away, and then all of a sudden there's a Leona that's completely out of position for the rest of the team. And it's this little micro moves, it's things that you can't teach a player, right? And that is the quality of Caps, which is why it makes him the best mid laner in Europe by such a wide margin. Because it's not something that as a coach you can go and say that, yeah, you see this thing here. When you see this, I need you to have the reaction speed to be able to buffer this in
Sure.
this way,
You can't teach
right?
that. Yeah, true.
You can't teach that.
True. What about just the one angle I would do, because we can now frame it against the Esports World Cup, is when they go there, obviously in the opening round they play FlyQuest, right? Most people expect them to win. I mean, a reason why I will also add in is obviously the main change in FlyQuest was Jensen went out and they brought in Quad. But Quad is going to be such a rookie. By the way, I don't even blame him if he does badly. Essentially, in his rookie split, he's going to have to go to an international tournament and play a mega experienced player in Caps and a really good team. So on that one, I expect them to get past that. But obviously, the interesting thing is in the semi-finals, if they get there, they will play the winner of Gen.G and Top Esports. Now, first of all, that's actually more interesting than people realise, because one, at MSI, Top Esports took them 5 games, Gen.G. And then two, actually, Top Esports might even be the best LPL team right now. They look pretty good. Obviously, Gen.G's mega. But obviously, you think to yourself, there's a world where it might be Gen.G against G2. What do you think of either? If they play Top Esports or Gen.G, how would you sort of shadow box G2 against? How do you think they'll do against either opponent?
I think that against Gen.G, it's something that stylistically, I favor the way that the G2 plays, right? I
All
think that this
right.
is a more proactive style. In fact, even in the domestic matchups, whenever I see T1 go up against Gen.G, even all the excuses aside, I prefer the more proactive, lane
Right.
dominant approach to his things. So the way that Gen.G has evolved, and the reason why Gen.G has been beating these lane control teams, is that they have been putting Chovy very actively on the side lane, and then
Yes.
that him going in and the very active teleport to then push in the extra wave stops the map control team from being able to get those deep siding pushes and to then get the effective map control, right? So that and we saw, I think, during MSI when T1 played against Gen G. I think this was last year already, actually at this point, where they actually
Okay.
had this brilliant trap where they set off a Chovy where they knew he was going to teleport to the side lane, so they had this trap prepared for him, but they would then have these wards to then pick him off in that scenario. Those are the exact tactics that I think G2 will have
Right.
to find. Like, how do we deal with Chovy getting the extra wave in the neutral position on side lane so that we can then get the deep pushes in to then enable play style, right? Because if they were to try to go up against Gen.G, play a long game and contest them in the mid lane, for a 5v5 team fight, it might be possible, especially with the form that Caps and the rest of the team is. Even Hansama has been playing very, very well mechanically, right? I know that for a while he was criticized for not being the best team fighting AD carry, but you see some of the movements he's making. I'm not sure if this is a result of coaching or him putting in the practice and stuff. His movement has gotten very, very good in the team fights that we're seeing in the LEC. So I definitely have hope for them in that scenario, even if they're not able to find those tactical plays against G2, against Gen G. It's against similar teams that play the same map control style as them, where I will feel that they don't have the necessary reps in Europe because nobody else actually plays this map control style in the same way that the top map control agent teams do, where I feel that they will struggle because then you end up playing in the exact same style, but you do not, but you're just playing against a better team, right? So I actually felt that T1 or things like that would be a worse matchup for them. And in the case, top esports might be a similar challenge for them because this is another team that has the map control approach to its things. I mean, of course, like I said, this has been much diluted as well, but when it comes to the core ideas of connecting support and jungle, controlling certain areas of the map, being able to defend the waves that are coming out, I feel that the Asian teams that understand this have this mentality towards the game, but then have the natural advantage over G2. And that's they do the same thing that because it's not like 2019 where they had this understanding advantage over how the game was meant to be played, where they would repeatedly push into these side lanes and then they'll catch the Korean teams on
Yes.
neutral
There could always be a
objectives.
step ahead, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, I agree.
right. So that advantage is no longer there for them. So you can look at it and say stylistic matchups. I actually, even though Gen.G is arguably the better team, I actually fancy G2's chances against Gen.G more.
Okay. Because the other thing is, obviously, they did play top esports at MSI, but again, two factors there. One, like I say, I actually think G2's players were all pretty much having like the game of their life for that tournament. There was a lot of really good individual performances. And then secondly, the counter to that is, I actually think some of the top esports players shit the bed a bit. Like Cream himself's a rookie. I actually did think he looked like he got pressured. What's his name? I'd actually think Jackie Love was fine. I think 369 maybe wasn't as good as people thought he would be. Obviously, everyone hoped he should be the best top player in the world. Like, there were some flaws. Do you expect a better performance from top if they play them?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the trio definitely was an overperformance and performance of both sides, and it's something that I wouldn't say is going to be. You see, the thing is that because it's two teams with similar ideas and approaches towards the game, it's hard to predict an outcome. But when
Right.
one team you feel has more quality over the other, you're going to see a very close game in general, right?
Yes.
But you cannot say that there are these tactics and that there are these reasons as to why one side will win out. It just comes down to player quality at the end of the day, and it comes down to what the prep is like, how the players are feeling, how the condition on is on the day itself. Um, when I made the previous statement, it made it sound like top esports is like a 70-30 favorite against G2, but it's in reality it's probably something like a 55-45
Yeah, that's fair.
favorite
That's fair.
in one side's favor, right?
Yes. See more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, be a pleb and don't.